Good morning, and welcome to the Universalist Church Online, in which love is the spirit. We are glad you are here, whether it's joining us from West Hartford, Connecticut, or anywhere in the world. I'm Kathryn, one of the trustees on the Universalist Church Board. If you're attending worship through our live YouTube live stream, we invite you to connect with us more deeply. Visit our webpage, www.westhartforduu.org, to learn more. There you can use the contact page to get onto our mailing list or let us know how you'd like to get involved. Our electronic communications are the best way to stay connected. We look forward to helping you become part of the Universalist Church no matter where you live. Online worship can be wonderful, and technology sometimes fails us. We appreciate your graciousness when that happens. Today's order of service will appear in the Zoom chat box and the YouTube description. Our Zoom fellowship times will begin shortly after worship ends. If you're attending through Zoom today, please stay online, even if you need to step away for a short break to connect with one another. Creating and strengthening our connections with one another is so important while we wait for the pandemic to end. These online fellowship times can help us do that. Now, please take a moment to turn off your email and other apps, put the keyboard away, and settle in for worship.
If you happen to have a home chalice, like you might have gotten, say, on Christmas Eve, please feel free to light it with me as we begin our service. And now, please join me in speaking the words of our affirmation, our covenant. It's in the description and the chat. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
This story is called Finding Your Way, Ethelred Brown, and it's part of Faithful Journeys, one of our Tapestry of Faith curricula. It's written by Janine K. Grossmeyer. The story of the first Black Unitarian minister shows the perseverance and indomitability of spirit that people of color have necessarily relied upon for centuries now, to make even modest gains, even in places recognized as progressive. One morning, more than 100 years ago on the island of Jamaica, a boy named Ethelred Brown went to church. Usually at this church, the people sang their creed, their list of what they believed. But that morning was Easter Sunday, a special Sunday, and so instead of singing the creed, the pastor said one line of it, and the people would repeat it. Here's some of the lines that Ethelred repeated with his congregation. We believe the Father is God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit is God, and yet they are not three gods, but one God. The unity in Trinity and the Trinity in unity is to be worshipped. And Ethelred thought, what? He liked math, and he knew how to add. He knew that 3 wasn't the same as 1. How can 3 things be 1? How can 1 thing be 3? It didn't make any sense to him. So right there, sitting in church, while everyone else was still saying they believed in a Trinity in unity and a unity in Trinity, Ethelred decided that he didn't believe that. He couldn't agree with what everyone else in the church was saying. He would have to find his own way. That afternoon, he went to his uncle's house. On the table was a booklet with the words, "The Lord our God is one God." And Ethelred thought, yeah, that makes sense. He borrowed that booklet from his uncle and took it home to read. It was written by Reverend William Ellery Channing, a Unitarian minister in the United States. After reading it and some other books, Ethelred decided he was a Unitarian too. And there were no Unitarian churches in Jamaica, so Ethelred knew he would have to find his own way. So that's what he did for years and years. He still liked numbers, and when he was a grown-up, he became an accountant, helping other people keep good track of their money. He got married, and he and his wife had 4 children. Then, when Ethelred was 32 years old, he decided to become a Unitarian minister and start a Unitarian church in Jamaica. He didn't even know any other Unitarians, but Ethelred Brown didn't let that stop him. He found his own way. He wrote a letter to any Unitarian minister in New York City, and he put it in the mail. Eventually, he got a letter back telling him he had to go to a school in the United States to become a Unitarian minister. Now, Ethelred didn't have much money, and he'd never left Jamaica. But he didn't let that stop him. He found a way. He asked people to give him money. He said goodbye to his wife and children, and then got on a boat to go to the United States. When he finally got to the United States, they didn't let him stay because he didn't have the right papers. Ethelred didn't let that stop him either. He found a way. He went back to Jamaica, fixed his papers, and saved more money. Finally, 3 years later, he arrived at the Meadville Theological School. He spent 2 years there learning to be a Unitarian minister, and he was ordained in 1912. He was the first Jamaican to go to that school. He was also the very first Black person to become a Unitarian minister. 100 years ago, that made a difference. Back then, people of different races didn't mix. The teachers at Meadville told Ethelred that he couldn't be at a church with white people. They would want a white minister. Because he was Black, he had to be a minister at a church with Black people. Except there weren't any Unitarian churches with black people. So the Unitarian teachers didn't actually think he could be a minister after all. That didn't stop Ethelred. He found a way again. He went back to his wife and children in Jamaica and started a Unitarian church there. It wasn't easy because the church didn't have many people or much money, and he didn't get much help from other Unitarians. But Ethelred had made his dream of being a Unitarian minister come true. After 8 years, he decided to start another church, this time in the United States. He and his family moved to New York City, and he started the Harlem Community Church in 1920. It wasn't easy there either. They still didn't have much money, and they still didn't get much help. His wife became sick, and one of his children passed away. Besides being a minister, Ethelred had to work long hours at a job he didn't like. But somehow, Ethelred found a way. For the next 35 years, Ethelred was the minister at the Harlem Community Church. Over the years, hundreds of people found their way there to pray and learn and worship and sing, just like we do at our congregation. In fact, one of the songs we sing has a tune named after the Reverend Ethelred Brown. It's in our Singing the Living Tradition hymn book, and it's called I'm on My Way. Ethelred Brown always found a way to do what he believed in, and so should we. As I consider his tale, I think of how much he had to teach the Unitarians around him. Their world was small enough even then that they couldn't even imagine a black minister being successful, even as he was allowed into their ranks. And now, believing in anti-racism, I wonder where the smallness of our own world is holding us back from that goal. People of color have a long history of guiding us toward a more just existence. We should seek their leadership now. Please join us in singing our doxology. The words are in the YouTube description as well as in the chat.
Our congregations need the support of members and friends in order to survive. And I know that we are all grateful for the ways in which we are supporting one another and this organization too. This is an ongoing time of challenge and opportunity, and the need for communities like ours, communities of justice, wisdom, and love, has only become more apparent. As one of the ways that we serve the wider world, the Universalist Church shares our general offering each week with organizations that are in harmony with our values, who do work in the world that brings us ever closer to creating the beloved community. So our offering today will be shared with Simsbury ABC, a part of the national A Better Chance organization that gives high school students of color opportunities to study at boarding schools or day schools that have greater academic and college preparatory resources than their local public schools can provide. Since 1973, Simsbury ABC has graduated 80 young men of color from Simsbury High School, 95% of whom have gone on to complete college and many to graduate work and leadership in their communities. Please use the links in the chat, in the description, or on our website to participate in our shared offering today. Our hymn today is Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's often called the Black National Anthem, and it was written by poet, educator, and NAACP leader James Weldon Johnson. It was set to music by his brother John Rosamond Johnson in 1899. It was first sung in 1900 by a 500-member Black school choir. Given its importance in Black history and justice-seeking and community, we sing it today to lend our voices into the call for an end to racism and the full inclusion of every voice into the human choir. In our time of prayer and meditation, I don't have anything to share with you on behalf of the community today. I do know that there are some people who are having a variety of things going on: hip replacements, hospitalizations, upcoming surgeries, recoveries, vaccinations, all sorts of things. And so in this moment, I would ask that you just hold our community and your own communities and families in your hearts and minds as we begin this prayer and meditation today. Spirit of life, mystery that exists in the in-betweens of molecules and the touching of held hands, in the lights of our computers and our cameras, and the faces that we see from just a little bit away. Community of being to which we belong no matter how we meet. It would be easier, perhaps, if we could all pray in the same way, or all at the same time, or with all the same names and ideas upon our lips, but we cannot. Instead, we choose a path that asks us to know ourselves, to be bound to others who believe differently, pray differently, speak differently, live differently. And we see that as a blessing, a strength. We choose a path that brings us together in promises, in ways of being with one another and the world. It can be difficult, but it is also powerful. We choose a path in which we offer our love and support to one another, knowing that it is the exchange, the connection, the relationship that is sacred among us. So may we lean further into our common way, to find within our promises to one another inspiration and guidance for our lives. With all the other people who believe differently, pray differently, speak differently, live differently. May we discover that our hearts are more open than we ever thought possible, that our networks of care and compassion include all that we come across. Every person, this wonderful world, and the whole of being. Please join with me in a moment of stillness. In this moment, may we discover that our hearts are more open than we thought possible, that all of our care and compassion includes everyone and everything that we come across. May it be so. Amen.
Our first reading is adapted from the entry for Joseph Jordan from the Dictionary of UU Biography. Joseph Jordan, born in 1842, was the first African-American to be ordained as a minister by the Universalist denomination. He founded the First Universalist Church of Norfolk, Virginia in 1887 and initiated an educational effort for African American children in Norfolk and vicinity. The missions and schools that were his legacy served thousands of children and families in Eastern Virginia over a period of a century. After trying many jobs, Jordan was ordained as a Baptist minister. When a Methodist friend gave him Thomas Whittemore's book, The Plain Guide to Universalism, Jordan's theology began to change. The book made an immediate, powerful, and lasting impression on him. Whittemore's book explains the goodness of the universe, the loving parental guidance of the Almighty for all of humanity, and the promise of salvation for all. It is not known which passages particularly attracted Jordan, but Whittemore makes it clear that Universalism was not a religion for the bigoted, but for those who could accept that God's love is extended equally to all, the powerless and the powerful, the oppressed and their oppressors. Jordan was ready to devour all he could find on universalism. Our second reading is BLK History Month by Nikki Giovanni, a Black American poet. If Black History Month is not viable, then wind does not carry the seeds and drop them on fertile ground. Rain does not dampen the land and encourage the seeds to root. Sun does not warm the earth and kiss the seedlings and tell them plain, you're as good as anybody else. You've got a place here too.
To make
Ethelred Brown, Joseph Jordan, Thomas E. Wise, Joseph Fletcher Jordan, David Hilliard Eaton, Yvonne Sion. Each of these people broke through the barriers of race in Universalism, Unitarianism, and Unitarian Universalism to become either a first or an early and important line of Black clergy and religious leaders in our movement. These are names that we should know as well as we know the names from our white history. Hosea Ballou, Theodore Parker, William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, John Murray, Olympia Brown. That most of us don't know these names, or their stories certainly as well as we should, tells us that we have work to do. And that if we seek to call the wider world into account for its racism, we must do the same here within our own community, within our own faith tradition too. I'm not easing you into today's sermon. I know that it is a flat-out statement to make, but at this point in time, I think we all recognize that we are past easing into the awareness of our flaws as Americans, and as an American denomination too. We have seen a rise of white supremacy into public discourse and political violence in our country. And that means it is no longer an option to ignore white supremacy, to allow it wherever it might exist. While Black History Month, as is often said, should be every month, this day gives us another opportunity to remember, to re-engage, rather than let one more moment slip past. Nikki Giovanni writes, "If Black History Month is not viable, then wind doesn't drop the seeds on fertile ground. Rain does not dampen the land and encourage the seeds to root. Sun does not warm the earth and kiss the seedlings and tell them plain, you're as good as anybody else. You've got a place here too." We need to encourage those seeds. We need to nurture those seedlings. And so today, we are learning about our history, our denominational Black history, and how that impacts us as Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalists today. This history is older than you might have realized. Ethelred Brown was ordained in 1912. Joseph Jordan organized a Universalist congregation of 20 families in Norfolk, Virginia in 1887. In 1888, he sought to become an official Universalist minister within the Universalist Convention. He was given a standard one-year license toward his ordination, and in the following year, he was accepted by the Universalist Ordaining Council with a unanimous recommendation. He was ordained the very next day, and then became the minister of the First Universalist Church of Norfolk. It served a congregation largely, but not exclusively, of African descent. Eventually, they had a building that included a day school for Black children in Norfolk and a sanctuary that served Black Universalists as well as local white Universalists who'd never had a Norfolk congregation before. In a denomination that was overwhelmingly white, and despite its Universalist theology, still segregated, Jordan saw that there was value and room for himself and for others. He created a congregation and a school that were the beginning of institutions that served people through a century. The Reverend Jordan's insistence that Universalism is truly universal has been a transformative reality on our movement. Right? Universalism says, and we say, that everyone is welcome. We don't always know how to do it well. We're not always successful in that. But Universalism tells us it is so, and Jordan's ministry made that real and reminds us all that we can do the same. The Reverend Thomas E. Wise was the second Black Universalist minister, and he went on to create 2 more Universalist communities of worship and education in Vir-ginia. Upon Jordan's death, Wise took over the leadership of the Norfolk Universalist community. And eventually, he was trying the best he could to run 3 different organizations in 3 different communities. They thrived with his presence, and they struggled without it. Overextended and unsupported by the denomination, Wise left the Universalist ministry. And then the Universalists turned to a 3rd Black Universalist minister, Joseph Fletcher Jordan, hoping that he would be superhuman and able to do what Wise found impossible. This is a process that every Black, Indigenous, and religious professional of color knows all too well. For as long as we have been bringing Black folk into our faith and our ministry, we've also been failing to do all we could to support them as our members and as our religious professionals. Our leaders and members of color on the whole have a higher rate of employment turnover in our congregations and our institutions, or they simply leave the faith more often than our white members and leaders do. And it's actually worse for Black Unitarian Universalists than for other people of color overall. Too often, when one Black, Indigenous, or person of color religious professional is unable to do everything, and they sit down or quit, take a break, or simply leave, we turn to another person of color and ask them to make it work, rather than saying, what is it that makes this too hard? How can we remove the obstacles that limit the success of our religious professionals and our lay people and our communities who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color? Why did no one seek to do more to help Thomas Wise or to help Ethelred Brown? These are ministries that were valuable, long-standing, and the successes that they had often were in spite of the systems that should have found ways to help. A recent book arising from our religious professionals of color, as well as our Black and Indigenous religious professionals, is called Centering. And it asks us to hear and understand the stories of contemporary religious leaders of color as they name the complexities of their callings and their roles in our faith. The Black writers in that collection show that our history impacts our present by naming the challenges and hardships that they have faced doing the work of our faith. We can, and we absolutely should, lift up that we had Black Universalist ministers who were colleagues of everyone else in the late 1800s. That is something to cherish. And as we recognize that, we must also state that we historically did not do what was necessary to support and expand Black Universalism. The Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, a contemporary Black UU minister and historian of our faith, tells us that this continued into the middle of the last century. He writes, throughout the 50s, half-hearted efforts to settle African American ministers largely failed, and good, qualified ministers, discerning that, went elsewhere. Throughout our history, African Americans have been scattered in time and place, and with few exceptions, have never formed a critical mass. Neither the Universalist Church of America nor the American Unitarian Association ever gave strong backing to African American congregations. That history continues into the 1960s, because in 1969, many Black UUs and their supporters walked out of General Assembly that year to the point where a denominational split seemed possible. Now, there's a long and complex story here, and it would take me well into the afternoon to tell it all. But the key points are these. The UUA promised to help Black UUs with $1 million of funding for programs designed for Black self-determination in 1967. There were real complications about figuring out who would be responsible for those funds when dispersed, how they would be distributed and used. Some people wanted everything to be perfectly integrated. Others said that there was a need for Black self-determination. And so in 1969, when the UUA was to be fulfilling this promise, it actually said it didn't have the funds it needed to maintain the operations of the UUA, much less give $1 million to the Black empowerment organization that had been chosen as the recipient. In the breaking of that promise, people objected. Many walked out. Many did not return. And we are fortunate for those who did. We are still challenged by the echoes and the repercussions of this event. Black Unitarian Universalist history is truly filled with obstacles and neglect. A deeply stony road. But it is also filled with striving and improving, with successes and challenges and change. There have been Black congregations and integrated congregations. There have been Black musicians, religious educators, and clergy who have changed our culture and risen through election, appointment, or employment to the highest levels of leadership in our faith. The Reverend David Hilliard Eaton was the first Black UU minister to lead a large and prominent church, All Souls, in Washington, D.C. The Reverend Bill Singford was our first Black president of the Unitarian Universalist Association from 2001 through 2009, and was joined in the 2017 co-presidency by the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt and Dr. Leon Spencer, both also of African descent. Carrie McDonald is our UUA's current executive vice president. Jessica York, Janice Marie Johnson, Hope Johnson, Cheryl M. Walker, Taquina Boston, Lauren Smith, Duro Farrar. These Black UUs have been presidents, directors of ministries, leaders who have served our movement and the aim of racial justice well and faithfully at the same time. And I promise you, I am missing important people in those lists of names. If I named for you every Black UU minister in the parish or in the community that I know who is a leader and does profound work, I would run out of time. Know that there are more people than you know, than I know, doing this work in our faith now. I say that because as a multiracial person, and if you don't remember that about me, it's okay, but it's also a story for another day. But as a multiracial person, I participate in our Black, Indigenous, and people of color religious professionals community. In my 15 years of ministry, I have seen the gatherings of this community go from being 20-some people who could fit in a relatively small hotel meeting room to being so many people that we no longer fit unless it is a big ballroom. I think we're approaching 200 attendees regularly. Our conferences now have breakout sessions that are larger than our original gatherings ever were. I don't know everyone by name anymore. And each year I discover new people who have joined our community. It is a profound blessing. And it's actually a really remarkable change in such a short time. And even so, there are people who were part of this faith who have simply found it too difficult or too unwelcoming to remain. Some of those people are people that I know and I miss. There are people that I have heard about and never had a chance to meet. The Reverend Yvonne Sion, for example, who was our first Black woman Unitarian Universalist minister. As part of the ongoing change and movement through time, we are now hearing from a relatively new organization, Black Lives of UU, also known as Blue. This organization is nurturing Black Unitarian Universalists. Rather than waiting for the denomination to get it right, they are getting it right for themselves and sharing that wisdom and leadership to ask Unitarian Universalism as a whole to learn and to do better. One of the remarkable things that Blue has done is ask the UUA to return to the sins of its past and to make things right. And so in 2016, the UUA committed to fulfilling its 1967 promise with a more contemporary $5.3 million commitment to funding Blue and the ministries and projects it creates from the wisdom and leadership of Black Unitarian Universalists. What they are doing is remarkable. It's exciting. They are offering theology. They are generating community. And the rest of us are fortunate to have this leadership in our movement. Black history is American history. Black history is Unitarian Universalist history. It informs us, it shapes us, it criticizes us, and it encourages us. If we listen and we learn, if we nurture the seedlings that Nikki Giovanni writes about, we will move far closer to the vision that Universalism, Unitarianism, and Unitarian Universalism calls us to make real. If we follow through on our covenants and our commitments, if we live what we believe and what we promise to one another, if we learn from the wisdom that is part of our past and our present, we can overcome everything that divides and diminishes. I pray that we do it. It is time that we do it. Amen. Please join me in speaking the words of our Unison benediction. You'll find them in the chat or the description. Engage with the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings.